So, good afternoon, and I'm grateful to be here to George De Pirou and other elements of the group of Project Damin. So, the title of my paper is Transfers of Precious Metals and Money Supply, Portugal, 16th and 19th centuries. In this sense, my contribution to this program, Damin, continued to be to explain the case study of Portugal because the program allows, I suppose, the comparative monetary and financial history. What is the motivation to this choice, to my choice? First of all, because the problematic of the causes of Iberian, not only for Portugal but also for Spanish, of Iberian economic backwardness was interlinked with the theme of precious metals. Why? A lot of studies of historiographical terms consider the 17th and 18th centuries to have been a wasted opportunity. Why? The general thesis of these studies underlines that the flows of metal increased the capacity to import, which led to Portugal's increased dependence in relation to the outside world. For Spain, the most recent theoretical discussion have reconsidered the problem under a formulation known as Dutch thesis. This is not my formulation today here, because for Portugal, a recent study developed by me and two other colleagues of my university has reconsidered this problem for the period of Brazilian gold, so the 18th century, the last 17th to all the 18th century, to demonstrate, the effects at the level of the money supply and in that sense at the level of potential investment in the Portuguese economy during this period of the 18th century. So my motivation is to demonstrate that Portugal was not only a European hub for the transfer of precious metals, and these metals really did feed a growing money supply and afforded the economy some stability in monetary terms. So these are my motivation, and what I present today here is very simple, is a paper very simple, because what I do or what we do. I analyze arrivals of precious metals in a first topic. The second topic presents a long-term view on development of the monetary system in Portugal in terms of monetary policy. And third topic provides estimates for Portuguese money supply with some rough statistics for the 16th and 17th century and more robust statistics for the 18th century. In terms of transfer of precious metals, I need to underline two points. First of all, we have in Portugal no systematic data for assessing the transfers of precious metals to the Portuguese economy since the 15th century. Another topic, another idea to stress is, however, the records of the arrivals of these metals at the Lisbon Mint can be a reliable indicator, not so much of the arrivals themselves, but more of the rate of their retention by the Portuguese economy. So here we have a table 1, where we consider the inflows in quantity of precious metals to the Lisbon Mint between 1487 and 1807. Why 1807 the stop? Because 1807 is stop of Brazilian gold, and we have data of Brazilian gold in Portuguese economy and robust data, and we stop in 1807. So the period began with the arrivals of gold from Africa, Mina, and ended with the arrivals of gold from Brazil, but also include the silver arriving from Sevilla. By observing these flows, we can conclude that silver was responsible for the largest share of such movements in quantity. In terms of subperiods, I put here 4 subperiods. a period for the 15th, 16th century and after to the 17th century, and 2 periods to the 18th century, and after I explain why. The first run from 1487 to 1576, and the inflow of silver was for 4 times that of gold, as you can see. But as the price of gold was higher, the inflows of gold exceed these times, 3 times more or less, the inflow of silver in value. During the 17th century, silver became predominant here, and this metal was imported from Seville, so Spain was the origin of this silver in Portugal. The third period, between 1720 and 1779, highlights so the predominance of gold. However, it should be stressed that for these dates, we are also consider the gold minted at the Brazilian mints, not only the gold that arrived at Lisbon Mint, but also the gold at the Brazilian Mint, because since more or less 8% of the gold that arrived in Portugal was already in the form of mint coins. So, for this period, between 1720 and 1779, I have here the flows of gold that arrive at Lisbon Mint, and also the gold are not also only from Lisbon Mint, but also from Brazilian Mint. The last period, this is different from the previous period, reversed this situation. This is why I cut this period in 2 periods, the 18th century. For once again, silver became predominant, as you can see, and with the amounts arriving at mint reaching unprecedented levels. As you can see, the total and the annual average, and here are in quantity, as you can easily understand. Table 2 compare these flows with wood production. For wood production, I use Barrett, a book wrote in 1990. This morning we discussed a lot about wood production. I don't know nothing about wood production, but for wood production with Barrett I can compare, but I think that the data of Barrett are more or less similar with the data that Juan Castañeda present for the International Monetary Fund in the beginning of the 19th century. So, comparing the wood production with these flows, we can see that the silver amounted to only 2% of world production and gold to roughly 20%. This low level of silver is explained, in my opinion, because this metal was very heavily traded on the market. So silver had a higher market price, and during more or less the 18th century, the silver coins, Spanish silver coins, circulated in Portugal, and silver was negotiated in the market, and we have a silent silver in Portugal during the 18th century, because gold have a lot of taxes, and so we have the inflows and the arrivals from Brazil to Portugal with the data very consistent. So, this is why I suppose, and my hypothesis is, that this low level of silver is explained because this metal was very heavily essential in the market, or on the market, sorry. The second point of my presentation topic is about monetary manipulations and taxes. So, these are the transfers of precious metals, but we need to link these transfers with monetary policy and with monetary manipulations and taxes that, like seigniorage, an important taxes to the crown, because debasement, as we know very well, imply increase in crown revenues, but are also answer to technical problems. Technical problems with coinage, like clipping, or linear metal became undervalued because we are in bimetallism. So gold and silver, sometimes with technical problems, we have undervalued metal, and this debasement link the mint prices with the market prices. So, let us therefore look at the consequences of the transfer of precious metals and their impact on monetary policy that was adopted during this period in analysis. I have here debasements of silver and gold in number and percentages, and I have 4 conclusions for my data. First conclusion are that debasement of silver exceeded, so I analyzed all the periods, so all these 4 periods, not each period, but the 4 periods. And the first conclusion is that the debasements of silver exceeded those of gold in terms of their numbers, and also in terms of their amounts, as you can see in percentage. The second conclusion is that the 17th century was the one in which debasements were heaviest, whereas the 2 previous centuries were the ones in which there was the greatest number of debasements. So we have here difference of legitimation also of debasements during this period. Third conclusion is that the 18th century, the century of gold, and is the century of the monetary stability in Portugal. A period, as you can say, of relative stability in comparative terms, since the mint price of gold did not change, and silver only underwent 2 technical debasements. These debasements of silver are essentially technical debasements and not debasement to resolve problems of wear, clipping, and so on. For conclusion, and I suppose this is important, is that it was only during this period of 17th century, is only between 1641 and 1671 that the financing of public expenditure explains monetary manipulations. Why? Because we have wars of restorations. Portugal became independent from Spain in 1640, and this period of debasement are linked, very linked in documentation, and all we can read about this period, linked with public expenditures, very precisely with the wars to finance wars of restoration, so the wars of independence from Spain. But the third topic of my presentation is a question: what were the consequences of bringing precious metals into the Portuguese economy? Here we need probably calculating the money supply will help us to assess the effects of the transfer of precious metals on the monetization of the economy. But previous some methodological questions I need to underline. First of all, I use certain benchmark years, as I use only certain benchmark years. Second point, in terms of methodological problems, we only consider gold and silver. I have calculation for the 18th century for foreign currency and copper, but the other components of the currency in circulation were extremely small, and as this meeting is about transfer of precious metals, I only consider gold and silver to answer the question of the theme of this conference, of this roundtable. The third point to stress or to explain is that the method used to calculate the money supply was not the same for the whole period. Recoinage or remittings of the two metals in the Lisbon Mint are used for the benchmark years of the 16th and 17th century. And here I wish to thank Claudio Marcilio to provide me with the data about silver bullion for the 17th century. For the 18th century, a more complete and precise calculation, because I know Lisbon Mint Archive with the coinage, mint coinage, recoinage, we have balance of trade, so the balance of trade and other elements important to calculate money supply. So for the 18th century, a more complete and precise calculation I conclude. So, in this table 4, we can say that it was in the 18th century that money supply increased most significantly. As far as the composition of the money supply is concerned, silver only became the predominant metal, as you can see, in the 17th or during the 17th century, since for all other periods gold was clearly predominant. We can say also that silver, when we compare gold and silver, the prices are different. I know this conclusion, but here I have money supply in value, so silver is only predominant during 17th century, but in quantity also predominance is during the 17th century and only in the end of the 18th century. Even if we consider the value record for the 16th century relatively low, back. Even if we consider the value record for the 16th century relatively low, during the 18th century there was a significant increase in the degree of monetization of the economy. We see the money supply, we have here the population, so we have here money supply per capita. And certainly we can confirm that the value for the 16th century was low when we compare the nominal money supply with nominal GDP. So we have here the comparison with nominal GDP. Since this data result, as you can see, for the 16th century, in an implausible values for the velocity of circulation of money. So the 16th century money supply is a rough statistic. However, it is also possible to put forward the hypothesis of the low level of monetization of the Portuguese economy, which may minimize the difference, but not cut the difference. Minimize, but I suppose that the reminting is not enough to calculate money supply during the 16th century, almost during the 16th century. In view, so this is a calculation that needs some precisions and more data. In view of the significant increase in the money supply, prices rose moderately throughout the period. We have here the price index to the benchmarks, but I have here the price index for all of the period. In this figure, we have annual evolution, and the exceptions were to be noted at times of military conflict, such as those which occurred in the mid-17th century, and in the beginning at the end of the 18th century. I put here a signal to these three periods. In the during the mid of the 17th century, the debasement of the currency was another reason to this, for me, to this increase in prices. If we have here, is the relation between the two macroeconomic variables. So Money supply and price index, we have, so the conclusion is that this evolution had a lot of increase, so we have some increase of prices only in periods of military conflict or in a period of debasement during the middle of the 17th century. So my conclusions are very quick, but I suppose this is a lot of story, a lot of history, a lot of centuries of history. So my first conclusion is that Portugal was not a mere hub for the transfer of precious metals, since despite the significant exports that occurred as a consequence of negative trade balance that Portugal had, I did not present here, but we know that the balance of trade of Portugal had a lot of deficit trade during the 17th and 18th century. So part of these metals were retained by the economy. The second idea that I want to stress is that monetary policy with fiscal needs only was adopted between the period between the 1640-41 and the 1671. The third idea that I want to stress is that the increase in money supply during the 17th and the 18th centuries at least reveal the existence of a monetary potential capable of feeding a monetization of the economy, and we have a monetization of the economy. The primary sector is at a high level of monetization in the Portuguese economy that offered more choice to economic agents. So the historiographical terms that the precious metals only were transferred from Brazil or from South America to Asia is not completely correct in my opinion. A lot of metals go or went to Asia, but also we have a potential, a monetary potential capable of feeding a monetization. So the economic agents had choice that they did not implement. So this is the idea. For conclusion, to conclude, a certain stability in prices in spite of the increase of the money supply. So these need correlations and other models, econometric models. I have not an econometric model, but I develop more this point in my PhD for the 18th century, but we have not an increase in prices, so the whole idea of the increase in prices as a consequence of the money supply in Portugal probably is not a real thesis or a thesis that needs to further development and further analysis. So thank you very much. I hope to be 20 minutes. I hope to. So thank you. So thank you.